Hi everyone, welcome back to Housing Over Headlines. Have you ever heard a news story and felt like something was missing? That was me this week. I kept seeing headlines like point in time count shows street homelessness decreased in San Diego County. And at first glance, that sounds like good news. But the more I thought about it, the more questions that I had. Because those quick news stories, those sound bites, don't fully explain what the point in time count actually is or what it isn't. And when you leave that part out, you can tell a very different story than what's really happening. And those simplified stories don't just stay in the news, they start to shape how people talk about that issue. So today we're going to slow this down, look past the headlines, and ask a simple question. Is the point in time count really the best way to measure how local policies are affecting homelessness? Let's start with the basics. The point in time count is required by HUD. That's the federal agency that funds housing and homelessness programs. And that's not just a formality. This data is used to help determine how federal funding gets distributed to local communities. So the numbers coming out of this count actually matter. And here's how that works. Once every year, on a single night, volunteers go out and try to count how many people are experiencing homelessness. That's right, one night. So most of the people that are doing this work, they're volunteers, not full-time staff, not experts, just community members who signed up to help. And that's important because when you hear official count, it sounds precise. It sounds complete. But what it really is a snapshot, a very quick, very limited snapshot. And that's an important distinction because the point in time count is required for funding, but it was never designed to be a complete count of homelessness. And if that's true, then we have to ask, should this be the main way we decide whether homelessness is increasing or decreasing? Now let's talk about what the point in time is not. It is not an exact count of how many people are experiencing homelessness. In fact, it's widely understood, even by the agency that requires it, that it is an undercount. And once you think about the process itself, that starts to make sense. So imagine trying to find every single person sleeping outside in the middle of the night, in a large geographic area, in a very limited window of time, usually just about 3 to 4 hours. And people aren't standing out in the open waiting to be counted. They're in cars, they're behind buildings, in riverbeds, tucked into places where they feel safer. When I volunteered for the point in time count this past January, one thing was very clear. There was no real expectation that we would find or survey everyone, not even close. And surveys take time. You're asking someone to wake up, trust a stranger, answer personal questions, all for a small incentive like a gift card or socks. That's not a quick interaction. And now multiply that across the entire city. It's just not realistic. And then there's consistency, because the point in time count isn't even conducted the same way everywhere. Some communities try to survey each individual, others estimate based on tents or vehicles. Some use formulas or algorithms to fill in the gap. So now you're comparing numbers that weren't even collected in the same way. And there's another factor people don't talk about enough: encampment sweeps. In many places, laws allow local government to clear homeless encampments without requiring them to provide stable alternatives like shelter beds or safe sleeping areas. So people are forced to move. And when people are constantly being pushed from one place to another, they become harder to find, harder to count. So if people are being displaced, hidden, or moving frequently, what do you think that does to a one night count? So what could give us a clearer picture? Here's the real question. If the point in time count has these limitations, why is it treated like the final answer? Because it's simple, it's official, and it fits neatly into a headline. But there are other ways to understand what's actually happening. For example, local outreach organizations often keep ongoing records of the people they serve, not just one night, every day. And in many cases, those numbers are significantly higher than what shows up in the point in time count. I actually saw this firsthand. When I volunteered for the point in time count in January of this year, I was paired with the head of outreach for a local North County, San Diego city, and I asked him directly about this issue of undercounting. He told me that his outreach roster from the year of the last point in time count included around 400 unhoused individuals. But when the official point in time count report came out, it counted less than 100. That's not a small difference. That's a completely different picture of what's happening in that community. So when we rely on a one night snapshot instead of ongoing real world data, we risk missing a larger part of the story. So why aren't we hearing more about that? Why aren't local governments and media outlets pairing point in time data with real time information from the people that are doing this work every day? And if cities are going to move people from encampments, shouldn't there also be a requirement to provide a real alternative? Shelter beds, safe parking sites, designated sleeping areas? Because telling someone you can't be here is not a sustainable solution. So the next time you see a headline about the point in time count, take a second look. Ask yourself, what is this number actually measuring? And maybe more importantly, what is it leaving out? Because how we measure a problem shapes how we respond to it. And if we're relying on incomplete data, we risk creating policies that look effective without actually solving anything. And remember, the point in time count has a purpose. It helps determine federal funding, but it was never designed to be a complete measure of homelessness. And when we treat it like it is, we risk misunderstanding the problem itself. In upcoming videos, we're going to take this one step further. We're going to look at real headlines from specific cities and ask, why are these numbers the ones being highlighted? What story do they make it easier to tell? And are local policies actually focused on housing people or just moving them out of sight? Because ultimately, this comes down to a bigger question. Do we want leadership that's focused on understanding the problem or leadership that's simply focused on looking like the problem is solved? Because this isn't just about numbers. It's about people who are living on the street, often with very few options. It really comes down to whether we're solving that problem or just getting better at making it look solved. Thanks for watching. If you've come across a headline that deserves a deeper look, leave it in the comments. See you next time.